It is every archaeologist's dream to make the discovery of a lifetime that turns our view of history on its head. In 2002, Vivian Davis of the British Museum made just such a discovery at this tomb at El Kab in Upper Egypt.
We began cleaning this part of the tomb and an inscription began to emerge in red paint. Vile Kush came. And guess what we've got here? We've got an invasion of Egypt by the kingdom of Kush, not just Kush alone, as it turned out, but Kush at the head of an enormous army that covered the landscape of Egypt.
This is the story of Kush, and of its kings who became the black pharaohs who ruled Egypt. It is the story of a black African civilization that flourished for 3,000 years. Of the Nile's ancient superpowers, Kush and Egypt, who were first friends, then rivals, then enemies. It's a story that international teams of archaeologists are still uncovering in northern Sudan, the heartland of the Kingdom of Kush.
It's what I do for my work, it's what I do in my holidays, so yeah, I mean, this is the ultimate for me. And there's always the possibility of making an entirely new discovery.
We found in this pit 7 marvelous statues of kings. Exciting, surely. I didn't sleep for 2 days.
We're rewriting the ancient history of this country on a yearly basis.
Now at last the archaeologists and their treasure trove of finds can reveal the full glories of a lost empire and the story of the Black Pharaohs history forgot. It is no wonder that Egypt, the colossus of the ancient world, has gripped our imaginations. Hardly surprising that its 3,000 years of documented history has been our Bible of the story of the Nile. Yet few of us have ever heard of the other great power on the Nile, and the thorn in Egypt's side, the Kingdom of Kush. And perhaps now is the time to redraw the map of the ancient world. Modern-day Kerma is like any other Sudanese town along the Nile. But 4,500 years ago, Kerma was the birthplace of Africa's first black superpower and the capital of the kings of Kush. Kerma is the beginning of our quest across distance and time to find out where the people of Kush came from and just how far their journey took them. It was the Nile that gave life to Egypt, and it was the Nile that created Kush. Its waters and fertile soil meant early farmers thrived, and they delivered vast wealth into the coffers of the kings of Kush.
Got to know this area really well. Back in the 90s we did 4 seasons of survey over the whole of this region.
Derek Welsby of the British Museum has been working in northern Sudan for 2 decades.
It's a really interesting area. You can really see the pristine Kerma landscape in many cases, with all the settlements surviving in situ and all the cemeteries associated with them.
4,000 years ago, the Nile split into 3 channels around Kerma. It's along the banks of the old, dried-up river channels that the early farming communities had their villages, still clearly visible as low mounds. And what might look like a jumble of stones is a vital clue for the archaeologist to the prosperity of the region.
This building we excavated in 1997. We have many buildings of this general form in these rural settlements. When you look at the details of the construction, you can see that they were designed for storage. They have a large number of stone post pads here. These are clearly designed to support a raised floor, which will have helped protect whatever is stored here. This is a typical sort of arrangement you get even today in granaries.
Kush's farms produced a large surplus that fed urban Kerma. It made the kings of Kush extremely wealthy, and it released people from the land to develop new ideas, new skills, and new trades.
It would support a large number of builders, artisans, craftsmen, the royal household itself, a complex administration, and last but not least the army, the thing that actually projected the power and might of Kush and allowed it to invade Egypt.
But before they became enemies, Kush and Egypt were trading partners. In ancient times, the Nile was the superhighway, north and south, and to it, and along it, flowed trade controlled by the kings of Kush at Kerma. In the desert outside the city is a recently discovered ruin which Derek thinks is a staging post on a trade route linking up with the Nile at Kerma.
We have this very distinctive pottery here, these ribbed pottery vessels, wheel-made, typical Egyptian products, being brought down here into the heartlands of the Kingdom of Kush. The pots themselves are just like the tin cans of the ancient world. They're the containers, and it's the produce within them that was being imported into this region.
Kush exported to Egypt the African goods it most desired: ivory, ebony, and wild animal skins. But above all, the pharaohs lusted after Kush's gold mines. Gold that secured the pharaohs' power and proclaimed their divinity. Gold, the flesh of gods, conferred immortality on those who wore it and were buried wrapped in it. The pharaohs' need for gold gave power to the kings of Kush, but it has taken archaeologists many years to reveal the true extent of Kushite power. In 1913, George Reisner was the first archaeologist to employ modern techniques in Sudan. He was an Egyptologist and could only see Sudan through Egypt's eyes. Reisner found many Egyptian artifacts at Kerma and was convinced that Kush was an outpost of Egypt's empire and its black African population, Egypt's slaves. Reisner's interpretations at Kerma and throughout Sudan put Kush firmly in Egypt's shadow for most of the last century.
I came here in the Sudan thinking to find Egypt, Egypt in the Sudan, but today I am very happy to find Sudan in the Sudan.
Charles Bonnet of Geneva University has dedicated a lifetime's work at Kerma to setting the record straight.
This building is probably a kind of throne room with 3 rows of columns, wooden columns, with a conical roof and a portico with wooden columns also. That means it is a sophisticated architecture, and it is strange to see that this architecture is so old, and it is the first model known of such a building. This building has nothing to do with Egypt. It is really African.
Kush's roots were uniquely African, but its kings proved willing to adopt new ideas, especially from Egypt, as Kerma's mud brick temple shows.
So few monuments in mud brick are preserved at 20 meters high. In Egypt there are very few. This tefufa, this huge construction, is very different than Egypt, but the general shape is like an Egyptian temple. And it is maybe the originality of what we found in Kerma. With the influences from outside, they can build something new.
Kerma's mud brick temple is an amazing survivor of 3,000 years of vandalism and erosion by wind and sand. Mud brick was the universal building material, but its ephemeral nature makes it hard for the archaeologist, and for us, to imagine just how impressive a civilization Kush was in its day. So much of it has simply vanished. New discoveries in the remote and rocky Fourth Cataract region show that as early as 2500 BC, Kush occupied far more of the Nile Valley than was previously thought.
This is a site that we certainly didn't expect to find in this area. This is a small cemetery of 19 graves dating to about 2500 BC to 2050 BC. Prior to this discovery, it was thought that the furthest upstream the first kingdom of Kush extended was about 70 kilometers from this point. But now we know that even at a very early stage, the boundaries of the Kingdom of Kush were much more extensive than hitherto thought.